Hello, welcome back everyone. Here we are for Compassionate Self-Care class number 7 tonight, and joining me shares Elena and Annie Holcomb, and our intention again is to create space here for you to consider your self-care and what supports you in having a relationship with yourself that feels more nurturing, more rewarding, more empathic, more effective in being in the world and in your relationships in a way that feels where you feel the most at ease and competent and comfortable with the progress you're making. And I will move to the slide sets. We'll go straight into the content tonight and really enjoy having your company. Thanks for being here with us. Jump into the chat if you would like to. Let us know that you're here, and if there's any questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the chat window. So let me start by sharing screens and we'll get going. All right. So for those of you who may not have watched previous classes, we are at class 7 of the program tonight, and I invite you to visit YouTube and Google Karen Thompson-Anderson. You'll find previous classes if that's of interest to you. Tonight's the module name tonight is about play, and what we've been doing over this 8-week program is actually looking within the program at the 5 core needs from childhood, and these are the core needs that psychologists have said are the foundational needs alive in childhood that really support us to develop our sense of competency and enjoyment of ourselves and our lives in adulthood, having a capacity for each of these 5 core needs. And we've looked at warm, secure connection, how we have, how our relationship style is, and so how that impacts our relationship with ourselves. We've looked at autonomy, we've looked at self-worth and structure last week, and or last fortnight, and then tonight we'll look at play. And before we jump into the play module, I was moved to take a step back and remind us where we were last fortnight with the core need for structure, because there's been some emergence of new thinking that's happened out of having that class. And just to remind you, we were talking about the 2 sort of elements of structure that are alive for us, both in how we structure our activities, our time, our personal care habits, how we schedule the activities that support us to sort of stay in alignment with all the needs that might be occurring in our lives. And then there's this the psychological structure, which is more the internal mechanisms, the ways in which we interpret the experiences that we're having. And certainly with my learning of nonviolent communication, the sense I have is that my capacity psychologically to move and lean towards empathy and compassion as one of my psychological structures has been developing with the learning that I've done there. And so just becoming present to the sorts of mental structures, thinking structures that we also rely on to help us interpret and make sense of things. So this is the extra piece of content that's become somewhat of an interesting exploration. There's certainly not any facts here other than that I was moved in conversation with both Shez and Annie to perhaps in addition to the psychological models that we're aware of and the ways of looking at structure that we have already addressed, that there's perhaps another way to look at structure, and that is in relationship to the body. And this is certainly the work that that Annie particularly is contributing to for me in building more consciousness about 5 core needs and how they live in the body. So the conversation was about seeing structure as both something fluid and something firm, and that perhaps the way we've learned structure, a lot of us in childhood, certainly for me, was that structure was a very rigid thing. And when we think about the spine, comparatively, structure, it would not serve us well to have a very rigid spine, that in fact to be able to move with what comes up for us in our lives, the challenges that we face, the things that go on for us, that there's more capacity when we stay in some fluid movement, but we still need the support of the sort of firm pieces of the spine. So we're thinking about the skeletal system there as more the firm pieces of the structural support, and then looking at empathy and the softer skills as the ones that resonate for me as the ways we make meaning and we are more fluid around that structure. So just wanting to, I guess, start this conversation tonight with this idea that structure is something that when we're designing it for ourselves, when we're looking at structure, that we can begin to make sense of it in our own sort of sense of integrity. We're making a self-determined, self-caring structural plan. And yeah, it came up today as well that we were talking about when you're coming from a paradigm where everything's been about control, where if fear has been a major player in how you've designed your structures, and if have-tos and shoulds have been very rigidly put into your structure when childhood, structure for me was something that I really struggled with because I was rebelling unintentionally or in sort of unconscious ways to anything that fixed me in to a routine or a structure that felt like it was rigid. I was in rebellion to pretty much all of those sort of structural things, and it was only in the sort of understanding and healing of my pain around how I learned structure in childhood that I was more willing and able to implement structure more effectively in my adult life. So this last point here, integrity is the empathy. For me, I'm really understanding how empathy as a process really serves my sense of holding my structures in place. Empathy allows me to self-connect when I feel frustrated or challenged by structural commitments I may have made. I can empathize with of course, there might be some part of me that's feeling tired or some part of me that's not feeling as alive for my commitment. And yet there's a willingness to hold care for myself and hold my agreements. So one of those is my dishwashing routine. And some nights I just really, it's not alive for me to want to finish my dishes, make sure that the kitchen's all clean before I go to bed. And yet it's become such a key piece of my sense of structure and order in how I enjoy my habits of self-care at home. So it's just one example of, sometimes I do empathy for myself as I'm washing my dishes at night before bed. So this sort of relationship between empathy and compassion and how it serves us to hold some structure, and also how there's both the fluid elements of it and the warm firmness of other elements. So thank you. I just wanted to drop back in on that conversation from last fortnight. And if you would like to, Annie, I'd be really open to hearing, you know, as the conversation's been evolving, what stood out for you. I'm not hearing your microphone, so I'm just coming back to check if your microphone is on. Okay, I'm seeing your message that you can't turn your mic on. Okay, yeah. I see you're going to reload, so I'll come back and check in. So what I'll do then is just take you to, well, there's one more point I can make here that I found interesting when I was reviewing this. I learned about, when I went looking for an image that would support me telling a bit more of a story about our structure and how we move, I found this, I don't know how to pronounce it, kyphosis and lordosis, which I'd heard of before, but these describe the curves in the spine. The lordosis is the inner curve, the kyphosis is the half moon curve in the top of the shoulders. And when I was thinking about it, it was like, oh, so there's, you know, some natural stances that would reflect us being in alignment with our spine and with ourselves, and there's some postures that wouldn't be in alignment with the best stature of the human form standing up. And I thought, well, that's really interesting to me, actually, because they're sort of representative of the fact that you can't really have structure that's a complete straight line. It needs the movement in it. And if we move too far in those curves, we're actually potentially doing some disservice or disharmony to our posture, our alignment. So just looking at that, that it's important. It's like being in the middle path, not the extreme of each end, not totally rigid and not totally fluid, having that combination and staying in that middle way. How did you go, Annie? Did you get to reload?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah. Jump in.
Okay, so I've sort of lost my train of thought because I was too busy reloading.
Yeah. I can really get that. It's frustrating with the technology, the way that it hasn't served you right now. And I wonder, I'm remembering you share about the class that you had this morning and something about how that served from the point of view of structure. It was really taking care of, you know, a weekly ritual that you have in your classes with the other participants to really take care of the flexibility and the integrity of the body by really nurturing it in that space.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that it really.
Yeah, and I'm looking at your little man there with his kyphosis and his lordosis. So we tend to say in somatics that curled forward with that kyphosis in the upper spine is like it's a red light response. So it's a caving in, it's a stopping, it's a curling in to yourself. So you'll notice that sort of structure. If someone's feeling depressed or anxious, they'll start to cave in like that and cover the chest. And then when it's the other way, where you've got that lordosis and the lower back's got a big sway back in it and the chest's really open at the front, is the green light response, where it's a lot more like a collapse. They're the people you meet who tell you everything about everything before you've even, there's no boundaries there. So the whole front of the body's open. And so we're looking for that lovely midpoint between the red light and the green light, which is, I think, what you're trying to sort of get to. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a easy way to grasp this conversation. For those listening, I really get a sense that being able to bring this conversation into the body the way you've just done is really helpful, not only because the analogies are so rich, but because this is how we're living these core needs. We're really living them in the body. And if we're, for example, still relearning how to have a strong sense of self-worth, if we're still relearning how to have warm, secure connection with ourselves, the impacts of needs not met are going to show up in the body in these ways that you're describing, where we might be unprotected and overly extrovert and overly open, or we might be overly closed and overly collapsed as a result of this out of alignment, out of integrity learning that we've done. And so the learning is going to support us back towards this integral alignment with ourselves, and happens emotionally, psychologically, and physically. So this is the delight I have of bringing all these pieces of the puzzle together. Yeah, thank you. Anything else alive for you?
No, I think it's really good to see it all together. Like that we're a holistic being, not just working this out with our mind, but how much our body mirrors and where we are in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And another aspect of this that's just come to me is that, although we're focused here tonight on the self-care aspect of structure and how this operates, I was only looking today at an organisation that's global, and a global organisation that's shifting from the top-down hierarchical structure, very rigid, and with all of the decision-making being made by a board at the top. It's like being focused in the mind, and they were getting a lot of bottleneck over decisions that was all happening too slowly through that small little portion of decision-making. And they're shifting from a hierarchical structure to a self-managed organizational structure. And so as an organization of many, many hundreds of people, they're shifting to this sort of consciousness too, as a group. So as much as this is very relevant to the self-care understandings, it looks as though there's going to be more movement organisationally towards this sort of consciousness too, that we need flexible systems that have some warm firmness to how they operate, so that there's some structural elements that serve the ability to stand up. You know, they serve the ability for us to have strength in our structure, as well as fluid movement in the structure. So just an additional point of interest for those who enjoy organisational design and development. There's certainly some interesting things happening on the planet with organisational design too. All right, so tonight's aspect, the fifth of the 5 core needs, is play. And wanting to bring this picture back for those of you who might remember it from previous classes, particularly because I am enjoying the exploration of adding an earth element or nature element to this story of the 5 core needs. And so for me, when I was reflecting on it, I thought, well, play for me is the babbling brook, or the joy of imagining, you know, a little stream with playful water playing and jumping over the rocks, and having a sense of life and fun. And then the thought went from a babbling brook to a stream flowing with the way that it curves, the way that it moves through the landscape, and then a waterfall, and then an ocean wave. And I was thinking about all of the ways that I could imagine people experience play, and how unique it is really to what calls us. There's been some fascinating research done on play. There's been studies done, and I'm curious to share some of the links to that below the video and in the YouTube channel. There was a TED talk by a fellow who did some research with 6,000 play case histories from a range of. He actually did, I think, quite a number of those research case studies in Texan prisons, and found that play was equal to, at the top of the list of influencing factors that predicted whether or not people ended up as murderers in Texas prisons. So essentially, the impact or the importance of play was, is all throughout his research and others who have informed my understanding of the importance of play as a core aspect of our well-being. And there's something about in this picture too, a sense of the structure that we've been talking about, the structure, how the structure grows as we grow. If we're looking at the nature analogy of the seed, the story of the seed, and how we need that sense of firmness and structure to reach towards the sunshine and to receive the elements, and that water is play is the nourishment that we need to continue our growth and to keep us supple and flexible. So just that I enjoy coming back to this photograph or this image here and bringing our awareness to how the 5 elements work together. So really the invitation then tonight is to consider, like, how do we play? What's our most enjoyable sense of play? And when we think of play, like for some people, it's really, they go immediately to the ideas of adults doing competitive play, maybe sports, activities, footy and so on, or child play, which is the arts, the creativity, the playing tag, swinging upside down on the monkey bars, doing things that very encouraged and often facilitated in childhood, but then are less so as we progress through our schooling lives. That there's less, unless you specialise in one of the creative arts, opportunities for creative expression tend to drift away in the later years of school, and that there is a sort of an adult perspective, really, that play is a bit purposeless, and that for that reason, if we become very focused on all of the things that we need to get done, then play can really slip off the table as one of those elements that doesn't have as much sort of, I guess, it doesn't thrill the mind as much, because play is something very much in the moment and in the body, and it also really play, the best of play strategies might be said ones where there's less mind involved and more spontaneity. But I'm curious to check in with you, Shez, and with you, Annie, too, about our personal definitions of play and how it is for both of you as well. Maybe Shez, if you'd be willing to jump in.
One of the forms of play that I enjoy is improv. And I play this with some friends, just we have a theme and being in the moment, really just expressing what's alive in the moment. So it's and then there's a totally different form, which is contact improv, which is movement based and where you're in contact with another person. But there's other things that I like to do for fun, which is sitting on the swing in the park in my street, playing with my cat, putting on ABBA or, music that I love, and dancing. I don't know, talking in funny voices, like telling jokes, laughing. Yeah. That's some of the ways that I like to play. And at the same time, I almost feel like a need for bringing structure to play so that play happens, because otherwise I can be prone to just being busy doing the, in inverted commas, important stuff. Yeah, like having an agreement with myself that I'll have social engagements, like the other day I decided that I really would like to have some people come to my house, and I actually had my next door neighbours in for dinner, and they have 3 little kids, and it was really fun. I was like, oh, I need to do more of that. I want to do more of that. That was fun. Yeah, that's what's there for me right now.
Thank you. And I love that you bring the structure piece, that actually putting it as a habit into a diary, or being imaginative with ways to bring play into the structure of things, of weekly or how we structure our time. It just invites the space for play. I'm remembering reading an article from one of the contributors that had the story of a burnt out executive who realized at a certain point in her career that if she wasn't playing, then she wasn't being able to be innovative or energized in her work. And so she takes time out every morning, half an hour in her schedule now, to rollerblade or do something fun because it's an enlivening experience to be in the moment, in the enjoyment, the pure enjoyment for its own sake, and to find things that really resonate with us as our method of play and relaxation and fun, and to have a sense of its importance. I think that's sort of what I'm hearing from you too, is this: it's really important to structure space for play, and to just be conscious of how much it contributes to us. Stay present to that. How about for you, Annie?
I was just reflecting on that idea of structure for play too, and someone said to me this morning as they left the studio, organised people, I have a girlfriend who's very organised, and she's organised because it allows her to be spontaneous. If she's organised, then she has room for spontaneity, which I found interesting, because sometimes you would think of them as opposing, that you were super organised, so everything was too structured, but enough structured gives you scope to be spontaneous. Yeah, I know it's challenging for people when I'll say to them in yoga, play around with that or see what happens, play around with it. And some people, if they're not been used to being able to be free, they want a definite instruction, like your arm goes there, your knee goes there, and then you do this and you'll feel like this, rather than let's play with it and see what happens and be curious. It could be educated out of us that we're allowed to do that. I was thinking also of things like playing. We play sport and we play piano, but I've got very different experiences of musicians in my life, ones that can't, if I took the sheet music away, they would not be able to play their sonata that they know, and other ones who would never use any structure like that and just can play and invent and create with music. Very different ways of doing things. Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? I feel undervalued in our society.
Yeah, that sort of resonates with me when you say that play is undervalued, and I wonder, about that in terms of how we design spaces, public spaces, and how we, contribute to play as a social dialogue more often. There's certainly I've noticed more in my LinkedIn feed in the last 12 months about play for corporations and bringing play back into the workplace, and different ways that there's a sort of rising awareness of the importance of play in how we stay healthy and have a sense of aliveness, creativity, well-being. And I really enjoy that we personalise that, not just be told how to play, but actually personalise and explore what we most enjoy as our play. And I'm fascinated with the example you've used, Danny, of the musician who relies on sheet music and the musician who can play spontaneously, and that both are very valid ways of enjoying a sense of playfulness depending on the person. So, it's another element of this story of structure and how, you can have the main elements, which might be the ability to play the chords or play the notes. And then so that's the core structure. And then you've got all this fluidity or capacity for movement around that structure that's very personal. So, it's an invitation tonight for us all to just reflect on where is play, where are we at with play, what do we enjoy to do, and maybe even to be a little adventurous into, what new ways could I play in my life and make time for that would be interesting to explore. So that's the invitation. And moving on to this last slide, the wellbeing slide again, imagining how play might contribute to your well-being relationships with your sense of purpose, perhaps. Could you, a lot of us are very purpose-oriented, purpose-driven. Could we bring more play in how we live our purpose? Could we bring more play into how we relate in family and community? Could we bring more play in how we structure our time, how we maybe even how we meet challenges, with technology, or with, I know a friend of ours who enjoys coaching her clients with playful financial strategies, being playful about, or what would be some fun goals to include in your budgeting. So there's these, how we bring play alive in our well-being really is how we bring play alive in each of these well-being aspects. Just looking at ways to, again, to focus on the life-enhancing connection that we have with ourselves. So revisiting the self-care pathway, I just would like to name through the steps as we've covered them in the past, and then invite those of you interested. Oops, that's my puppies. It must be good timing then to jump into the Zoom call. So we'll do that next. The steps of the self-care pathway, the meeting of the parts of us that are in opposition or in struggle, stepping through finding the honesty with ourselves of the things that are important to us, bringing real warmth and kindness to ourselves as we explore perhaps things we've been telling ourselves about these core needs, about stories about them not being met, or stories about our not being good enough. Finding the honesty with ourselves of what we've been saying, and then bringing warmth and empathy to soften and to explore, is that really true? Are there other ways that we could self-relate? And then dropping in deeper to mourning the impact of some of these belief systems or ways of relating with our core needs that we've had in the past, and moving to an appreciation of the capacity we have now to relate to our core needs and to look after ourselves with more capacity, and then connect to what we're really, what calls us next, to connect to the values that we have and to celebrate those and to move with intention in alignment with what we most value. So I will skip us forward to the last slide here, and I'll drop back into, I'll stop the screen share and just drop back into the group. But I'm inviting those of you who would like to now join us in the Zoom room. And thanks again to Shez and to MVC Melbourne for her generous support of the Zoom suite for us to use. So thank you. That's the class component tonight. We're just on 35 minutes. That's I'm celebrating the time effectiveness tonight and wanting to invite feedback. So please leave your comments below the video here on YouTube or in the chat box here if you're live. Let us know if you'll be joining us in the Zoom room. And thanks again, as always, to Shez and to Annie for your companionship, your care, your contributions. Thank you. And look forward to seeing you all for the next class. I will be in touch to those of you who are regularly registered. There may not be a class next week as we have Annie will be in Hawaii and delightfully writing was wonderful. And Shez has a meeting, so we won't have all three of us next week, and we may, but I'll be in touch whether or not we'll do integration week next week or perhaps when all three of us can get back together and to do that for you. So until we see you again, take care. Bye for now.
Bye.